Every question is the beginning of a quest, and the nature of the question determines the nature of the journey and its outcome. The questions we ask, the questions we embark upon, psychologically and physically, have a tremendous impact on the reality we experience. And one of the most rewarding quests is the question, what does value look like in this situation? If you were to embark on a journey this hour today to explore what does a valuable life look like to you? What does winning look like? What does a valuable game look like? If you were to invent the most valuable game and then describe the most valuable win, what does that look like? Now, this is an ideal. It's never going to be fully realized because its purpose is to provide tension between the ideal and where you are now. The purpose is to provide a compass, because once you've established the ideal, and this is why it is so important to have a sense of the divine. Because in the 10,000 cultures in human history, almost all of them, save for the materialist faction of our own cult, almost all cultures have created a narrative, a story about a consciousness, a pattern of energy that is bigger than ourselves. And this is highly consistent with science, because if we look at the fractal nature of reality, if we look at the way that all of reality around us is a fractal echo of bigger patterns and smaller patterns. If we look at the individual here, because we are very self-absorbed, and so we think about, us, not the size of an ant or the size of a molecule or the size of an atom, though if we were atoms or molecules, we might just as easily in a fractal reality look at those things. If we look at an individual, we can see that the individual in many ways is a fractal echo of the family. You can look at individuals and then meet the family, and you can say, oh, that's where that came from. And there's certainly a tremendous amount of commonality. I mean, all the 5, family members, they all have fingers, they all have feet. They're probably similarly skinned. They may smell similarly. They probably speak the same language. There's a tremendous amount of fractal echoing. And so we see the family unit. And if we look a little bigger and look at the family unit in detail and then look at the culture, the community around the family unit where they grew up, you'll probably find similar memes, similar ideas. And if you look a little bit bigger at the human species, again, you'll probably discover, African Americans, they have toes and fingers, but, they enjoy having a good time. Caucasians, they do as well. What about, the Chinese? Do they enjoy having a good time? So, there's a tremendous amount of echoing as we get bigger and as we get smaller. And so the idea that beyond the species, there is a bigger pattern of energy is not very far-fetched. It doesn't take a lot of faith to look at an infinite continuum of scale and say, you know what? You know what? This pattern has only been repeating itself for billions of years. At every scale, there's a bigger and a bigger and a bigger, and at every scale, see, we haven't even found the smallest subatomic particle. We're still hunting. We've created the Large Hadron Collider and, miles of high-speed electronics just to try and find, and there's always something smaller, and there's always something bigger. So probably, highly likely, the instinct has led most of the 10,000 cultures in human history to say, there's bound to be something bigger. Now, what's it likely to be? Well, we say that humans were created in the divine, the image of the divine, and in various religions. In a chauvinistic religion, of course, we say that man was created in the image of God, because that's what chauvinists do, is they take the whole, they divide it in half, and then they focus on one half. It's not very scientific because, as everyone knows in any ecological system, one half doesn't function very well. One half of a species, take away all the women, collapses rather rapidly. One half of a human being, cut yourself in half and see how well the right half performs relative to the left half, and it doesn't work very well. And so in all polarities, there's a mental value in becoming conscious to cut something in half. And that's really why we take the whole and slice it up into language. We take the one and we divide it into pieces. But the pieces aren't real. And what I mean by that is you cannot have California without Utah. So it's a little bit arbitrary to pretend that this is the line between California and Utah. I mean, what about the rivers that flow in and out? What about, you couldn't have the United States without a planet. So, it becomes somewhat arbitrary to be slicing and dicing all of the ecological framework of the circle, of the sphere, of the totality into all these bits. But it sure makes for a good narrative. It sure makes for a good adventure. Because once we cut the one into an infinite number of parts, and counting, because the universe is getting bigger every single day. And so as it's getting bigger, once we create language to slice and dice all that is, now we can figure out how to work with it, right? Well, this bit is this bit, so we pretend, and this bit is this bit. So what happens if we combine this bit and this bit? It already is, in many ways, combined. And we're just part of this endless iteration process of creating new and more complex forms of energy out of other complex forms of energy in this tremendously creative process. And so, this idea that there is something bigger than us is common sense. The question is, what is it, right? And of course, we say the world is created, or humans are created in the image of the divine, but it's just really the other way around as far as our consciousness is concerned. What we do is we take our ideals, our values, and we instinctively imagine that what is bigger than us, what is more evolved than us, what is more complex than us, is going to be more of that. It's somewhat egocentric, naturally. That's what egos are. They are illusionary partitions within the ecology of energy that pretend that they have nothing to do with anything else. And so, we project ourselves out there on the divine. And the divine gives us the model, the template to aspire to become what? More of ourselves. To take that which is within us and actively participate on an evolutionary journey. And so that's what the ideal is up there. And it changes, of course. The ideal changes because we have simple minds, number one. And number two, as we engage with reality, we have an impact. We impact reality. And so as we pursue the left, think about taking a step, a bipedal motion begins by one side leaning forward, and leaning and leaning and leaning. Now, if you just keep leaning forward, you fall over. So at that point, you realize that what was such a good idea, to take that first left step was great, right? It's taking you forward. But it's obviously not working anymore, is it, right? It's working, and then you fall over. Because it's asymmetrical. It's too asymmetrical relative to the rest of the system, the rest of the pattern you're a part of. So then you discover, to keep going forward, now you have to lift up the right side. Now you have to take the other side and lean it forward. And then you get your scale right. Your scale, if you're trying to walk, is the right amount of emphasis on the left before you switch to the exact opposite and emphasize the other side. And this is why chauvinism is so problematic, because chauvinism takes the one, the whole, divides it into two. So far, so good. We're inventing consciousness. We're through distinction and creating language. But then it says that half of all that is innately better than the other half. And so it fights with reality. It's called dogma. It fights with reality because reality is saying, no, it's time for the other side. You've said your piece, now it's time for the other person to say their piece. And the chauvinist can't grasp this. Like, I thought me doing my piece was good. Yes, but it's part of a larger pattern. You see, you do your bit, then somebody else does them, and then you do your bit again. And that's how you walk forward. But a simple mind cannot grasp that if this is good, then more is better, more is better, more is better, more is better. And a simple culture, you take the whole, the circle, you divide it in half. You say, this is good, this is bad. We, of course, are good. We're the good people. Those people are the bad people. And so our job, the good people, is to kill the bad people. And then the whole world will be good, right? And so we go to war. A simple culture will seek to extremism in some form. Out of the first recognition, this is good, there's a piece for this. It'd be like the liver saying, I do a good job, digesting and changing this and that and the other. And so the whole body should be a liver, starve the feet, starve the brain, etc., grow more liver, right? And when the whole body is a liver, then, who's going to feed? There's no feet left to feed the liver food, right? And so it falls down. And so this is the tension between science and the simple paradigms of immature individuals and immature cultures. And of course, immature cultures, young cultures, produce immature individuals as cult members because of that very fractal pattern. And so coming back to our beginning, what does value look like? What does value look like to you? And if you are in tune, if you are connected with your center. Now, your center is in the middle of your system, right? And at any given point, we're off balance, we're off center. You know, when you fire a rocket, it's got a guidance system, but it's always off center from its guidance, and it's iterating and iterating and iterating and coming back to center. Your success, your state of grace, your competence emerges as you find what is your center, and then notice where you're at in relationship to it, and then complete the cycle of coming back to center, because this process of coming back to center is like an infinity loop. So here's your center, and you've got to go off center to the left and off center to the right and off center to the left and off center to the left, and then you find your center. Because if you just stay rigidly on the center, you die. Now, because we can trust the fractal nature of reality, we can look for areas that we do understand to understand some aspects of the areas we don't understand. Because breath is part of that fractal pattern of going off center, right? We know that without breath, we die. So we've got to breathe. If we want to live, we can debate it, but our debate will be short-lived, because if we do not receive the gifts of our ecology on a moment-by-moment basis, we will rapidly be dead. So it's a mute debate because you can't say anything once you're dead and your debate comes to an end. So you have to participate in certain rhythms, which are, of course, taking you off-center. The breath is taking you in. Now you're out here. You're out here. In the infinity thing, you're out here. And then you've got to turn and do the exact opposite. Now, you pass your midpoint in the middle of the breath. It's the state of grace. You're neither you're neither in nor out. You're in. It's that flow point between the polarities that is life. But that point of grace, that beautiful point, that still point, is the point in the middle of the extremes. Now, one can then point at the extremes as, extremism. That's the problem. But the middle emerges out of the extreme. That point of grace, that point of beautiful presence, emerges out of taking a very deep in-breath and then a very deep out-breath and then back to center. You have a moment of center, and then you have to take a big breath and a big breath and back to center. You have to reach out in order to come back to center. You have to go on a journey. You have to go on a quest in order to, in the poem, return to the place that you began and know it for the first time. You have to travel to come back to the place of your origin and know it for the first time. If you don't leave, you cannot return. And so we are in search of the greatest joy, the greatest well-being, the greatest ideal, the greatest beauty, truth, and goodness. And as we pursue that greatest truth, that greatest image of our ideal, we also descend into our greatest suffering. We'll make it a little bit over here. We descend into the area of our greatest suffering because there's a gap. All pain is the gap between where we are and that sense of the ideal. If there is no ideal, there's no pain. If there is no longing for something, there's no separation from something. So the one pole creates the other pole. The aspiration for a great goal brings us face to face with the fear of pain, with the fear of failure, with the fear of never reaching that point. If you stay in the center the whole time, it's a shallower life. You don't live as much, you don't die as much, you don't change as much. You stay in the cocoon, the person who doesn't want to leave the house. They may be afraid of going up, or they may be afraid of the coming down that is part of the cycle of going up. So we set out on the quest for value with the question, what does I was watching a podcast the other day, loved the question, what does your rich life look like? I think it's Ramith Sethi, but it's an unusual name for me, and so don't count on that. But what does your rich life look like? Well, once you, of course, identify your ideal, then if it's truly an ideal that's part of evolution, because if you think of the evolution of God, and of course, within the cultural chauvinism, God is a man, and so, of course, must be represented by men in the church, right? Because man is the ideal. And you can think of this in the bipedal, movement of a cycle, where you have life exists in the intersection between male and female. Take away the women, oh my goodness, there are no men. Men have birth. You don't give birth to men. It doesn't work. So it's like all these. Well, anyway, it doesn't work very well. But within evolutionary terms, it is always, any process that moves forwards is going to swing from one side to the other, is going to emphasize, because that's how walking works. And so our best estimates anthropologically of the last time that the great mother, the great feminine, predominated in much of the archetypal renditions of the ideal was around 4,000 years ago. Maybe longer. But within an evolutionary walk, there will be an emphasis on the feminine principle, which in simple terms reduces to women, but in more complex terms, there is the feminine principle in every man and every woman. Every gender, just as our Chinese counterparts have been kind enough to illustrate with the yin-yang symbol, the little dot points out that at the center of masculinity is femininity. And at the center of femininity is masculinity. And this is, of course, obvious when you look at something like the communication dialectic. All flow is life. All flow is life. And sustainable flow is sustainable life. And so in the masculine-feminine dialectic, you have the listener and you have the speaker. And within chauvinism, the speaker is more important than the listener. And learning to speak is thus more important than learning to listen. And thus we have Toastmasters that will prepare you for effective public speaking and forget to mention the critical equal piece of effective public listening. Now, this yin-yang principle becomes obvious when you consider whether or not a speaker has any value if no one, not even the speaker, can listen or understand what they're saying. The perfect speech, whoever, Kennedy, the man, that we're going to go to the moon, whatever, take the perfect speech from the perfect speaker, which in a chauvinistic culture will be a man at the top of the rank hierarchy talking to large numbers of people and being, respected and all. Take the perfect speech from the perfect speaker and take away their audience. Remove every listener, including the feminine principle in the speaker themselves, the ability to listen and reflect on what is being said, and you get nothing. A speech with no listener doesn't exist. And so you find the counterpoint at the center of the polarity. Take a giver. And of course, in chauvinism, the giver is more important and valuable than the receiver, right? You're weak, you're nothing, because why? You're feminine. You had to receive. I don't, I give. I give, I don't receive, I give, right? So try to give a gift when there is no receiver. Now, if you cannot communicate without a giver and a receiver, without a speaker and a listener, if there can be no electricity without a plug and an outlet, a scientist concludes accurately that the cycle is in fact equal, that the North is as important as the South, that the East is as important as the West, that the speaker is as important as the listener, that the giver is as important as the receiver. That's how two halves fit together. However, at different points in the evolutionary cycle, different cultures have emphasized making something happen more than allowing it, speaking more than listening. Now, if you take the gift given by the cult, because it's an unquestioned meme, nobody sits down and explains why exactly giving is more important than receiving or speaking is more important than listening, but you need both, obviously, equally. And if you take the gift, but then understand that every asymmetry is ultimately toxic, because all extremism is ultimately toxic, and all stagnation is ultimately toxic, then what we understand is that within the larger evolution of this planet, that the movement towards data, towards language, towards particles, towards the individual, in essence, the movement towards the masculine, has brought about an evolutionary wave. It has brought about an explosion of manufacturing, of language, of consciousness in the masculine principle, of productivity. Produce something, take something and turn it into something else. Of creativity, take something and turn it into something else. That this long step within the species has taken us from the intuitive mysticism of Stone Age feminism into the age of conscious mastery in the co-creation and movement of material. And that now, in the emptiness, in the hollowness, in the broken promise of every extreme. Because every extreme, and this is unfortunately, in the fractal renditions of things, you have a circle within a circle within a circle within a circle within a circle. And, by the time we get as big as our solar system, let alone as big as the multiverse, it's too big to grasp. And there are cycles within cycles within cycles within cycles within cycles. But every cycle has a wave, has an up and has a down. And it's very often that if you look at the adoption curve, of any technology, think of cell phones, for example. The very beginning of cell phones, there was a big debate by the majority about whether anyone would want them. They were big, they were expensive, and with all that extra luggage and stuff and then bad connection, why wouldn't you just wait till you got home? Is it really that important you're going to see them in a little bit anyway, you can call later. Is it really so important to spend $1,000 on this huge thing that costs you $2 a minute when you finally reach someone? Nah, this is never going anywhere. IBM said the same thing about PCs when Gates had his vision of a computer in every home. IBM said, well, what nonsense. They cost millions of dollars. They take up, entire warehouses of huge, and what is someone going to do with a spreadsheet? What's a housewife going to do with a spreadsheet? She's cooking, for goodness sake, And as all chauvinism, referencing the past and pretending that it will go on indefinitely, it's never going to go anywhere. But of course, just 50 years later, the computer, now in the phone, is considered by many the single most important technology in their lives. It's where they get most of their dopamine, their hits of feeling good, as well as their up and down cycle when nobody liked their post and all of that. It's where they get most of what makes them feel good. It's how they feel safe. So nobody's ever going to want one. That's down here. But you see, in a new technology, there's always going to be a few people who believe in the minority perspective, who create it out of nothing. The universe was created out of nothing. One day it poofed into existence. Well, there's always going to be people who say, what if we could talk wirelessly? And going back to, this evolution of, well, we'll just continue this off. So by the time that the majority is doing it, whatever it is, the majority now has a fax machine. Who needs a fax machine? Okay, we all need a fax machine. By the time everyone has a fax machine, there's email. And then nobody needs a fax machine, right? So there's an adoption curve of every single thing. Every idea, every ideal has a period, has a phase, and then it has a diminishment. Now, the point to join the ride is the point at which everyone is about to discover and adopt it. That's the point when the new thing becomes, incredible. That's the point to join. Once everyone has it, you have a plateau. And then you have a slow demise. And this is a cycle that has been going on at every level of reality for as long as reality has existed. And what an investor, of course, wants to do is wants to figure out what is the thing that's, going to take off and why, and, put their capital in, down here, and then get out up here, and then find the next best thing. The trouble is, of course, that most of people throughout most of history are wrong about the future. I mean, take the cell phone, concept when it was just beginning to come out. Most of people in human history, if you'd asked most people how important would this ever be, this little brick here of buttons here, will this ever be the most important thing in your life? Nah. Why? Because you're most people. Now, when Elon Musk was trying to sell Zip2, he was literally hurled out of an office with a yellow page book thrown at his body. Get out of here. We don't need this thing. We're the yellow pages, right? Well, of course, they were up at their plateau, but almost nobody knows where the plateau is. And usually because the law of normalcy, the law of mass, says that you benefit by joining the herd, by joining the majority. Why? Because whenever a little guy has a battle with a big guy, the big guy always wins. When a pinball and a bowling ball collide, the bowling ball always knocks the pinball out of the way. The pinball goes flying, the bowling ball continues. And this is the law of mass. And so the majority of people feel most comfortable the majority of the time copying the herd, being a part, identifying, aligning their thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being patterns with the thinking, feeling, and doing and being patterns of everyone. They look around and they say, what's good enough for the majority is good enough for me. And so that's where most people wait around and wait. And so this is, the late stage of technological adoption. But, whether it's Google's founders going around endlessly and having everyone say that search, making money on search, forget it. It's never going to work. Or Tesla being the biggest shorted stock in, the entire index of Wall Street until it became the most valuable car company on the planet by a factor of several. It's the craziest, dumbest thing imaginable until it isn't. And so where do you fall? Because unfortunately, if you want to leave the herd, which is always doing, the herd is always near death, because they're doing, by the time everyone's doing it, it's just about to be the next thing. The herd is always very comfortable. You're surrounded by people, echo chambers, all telling you that you're right and that's the only way to do things. Of course we believe in Jesus Christ and this. You too, of course, we all do. So wait till the year 2000, or of course we all believe this, or whatever it is. We all live in our little chamber. It's so comforting to have everyone around us tell us that we're right. But that's exactly when we are about to be wrong. Now, there's different cycles within cycles within cycles, and some of them are very big. So we've been riding the Chauvinism cycle, meaning, when, 2,000 years ago, if you were engaged in battle, who did you want on your side? You wanted the biggest person. You wanted the best sociopath. You wanted the one that aimed a spear right? You wanted someone who was unflinching, who wasn't going to be afraid of, who wasn't going to look at the battle and say to the women and children, you deal with this. It's big over there. I'm running away. So then we idealize the strongest, the most courageous, the biggest, the meanest, etc. And what do you get? You get a big guy There weren't that many, big women who could throw spears farther than men and all that. And so, the cult says, yes, men, we need men, right? And in that stage of the walk, the big brute was absolutely the distinction. That was the deciding factor on whether your group of 100 people came out of the encounter effectively, and would they take the women and children on their shoulder, and would they get through? That was the big deal. And so, cults, that becomes the meme, right? Big, strong, I want a tall, rich man, who's going to protect me, etc. That becomes the ideal. But of course, there are not a lot of tall, brutish men leading the new wave of evolution. Bill Gates isn't particularly big. Warren Buffett has said it's an absolute miracle. It's so lucky for him and his investors that he was born when he was born. Because if Buffett was born 500 years ago, he'd probably be a laughing stock because he's not very well coordinated, and his father would be beating him because he's not making enough wheat in the fields as his brother, right? But Buffett lucked out. He was born at a time when a dispassionate, unemotional mind brought into conjunction with something called the stock market could make lots of money in a cult that worships money and creating more money out of more money out of more money. And so Buffett, not a very good sports player, Bill Gates, not a very tall, charming person. Geeks, data analyzers, basically, are bringing in a new era. And it doesn't fit right. It doesn't feel, that's not the tall, dark, handsome motif. You see, and this is the sleep that an amnesia that's part of every cult in human history, is because it's efficient to forget the underlying mathematics behind every cult. Every culture in human history has at one point done the math, and everyone's gotten it, right? Yes, we want that tall, giant sociopath in our camp. Half of our tribe owes its life to 3 strong, fierce, sociopathic assholes who, weren't going to give up and terrorize the other tribe to such an extent that they left us alone, and now we have peace, right? That's what we want. But generation after generation after generation, that ideal becomes less and less relevant, but nobody's doing the math. Nobody's doing, wait a minute, when's the last time a giant has plucked us out and carried us across the wildfire? Maybe that's not the trait it got us here. The strategy that got us to here won't get us to here. And it won't get us to here. And that's the pivot point when the enemy becomes the ally, and the ally becomes the enemy. Because having a giant body that can throw a spear makes typos on a small phone. The ally becomes the enemy. Once parking spaces become so difficult to find that you want to drive around in a Mini or a Prius, then the quarterback feels uncomfortable. or doesn't get a parking place. And this is these turning points where you're told to do this, that this is what the way it's always been, this is the way. You need to get a university degree. So the prices of university goes up as the relevancy of universities goes down. And then you have this lost, when you have unconscious cultures, you have lost generations that are the sacrifices for not thinking, the sacrifices for not analyzing. It's a crisis. What are all the kids doing with their $100,000 education debts that can't get a job, that were lied to because it was true a generation before, but somewhere in that cycle, it would have been better to put that $100,000 into crypto until everyone's saying that to get rich, all you need to do is put money into crypto. And at that point, it probably would have been better to get a job, right? So the majority is always wrong, but it's also average. It's also, if you copy the herd most of the time, it will be okay. So in that cycle of idealism, where 2,000 years ago, God was a man, he was all-powerful, all-knowing. All-powerful, all-knowing, that was the real thing, that made God so interesting back 2,000 years ago. All-powerful and all-knowing. Well, today, almost all of us have God-like powers and knowledge. Any one of us could travel back to 2,000 years ago and visit the tribe. And when we predicted the eclipse, when we predicted what would be on the other side of the map, when we looked at Google Maps and said, on the other side of this hillside, there is a lake, I prophesy. He's all-knowing. She's all-seeing. She's all-powerful. She knew that when we combined this and this, there would be light. She made a basic battery or whatever and guided. How did they know that you're a deity, right? You're a deity. We worship knowledge and power. And so you become the deity. Every single one of us is a deity to our 2,000-year-old ancestors. But we're running thin. We're now in what? Because all extremes eventually lead to death. We know too much. It's too much information. You see, that wasn't a word 2,000 years ago. TMI, right? Too much information? It's fascinating. There's a herd over there. There's a tribe over there. They have red scarves. Tell me more. So the extremes die out. And we are at a very pivotal change. We are at a point in history when the chauvinism of the self-referential masculine is kind of stretching towards suffering, not towards evolution. And it's time for the next step. The next step, which is and always will be the polar opposite. It's time to focus on the art of listening, the art of receiving, the art of perceiving, the art of conceiving, the art of presence, the art of feeling, the art of relating, the art of reconnecting the dots, the art of the circle, the art of community, the art of the interconnected ecology, the art of the family, the emphasis on the minority. It's time to go inward. So, as we do so, of course, every simple mind, every culture that feels some benefit, of course, likes to go to the other extreme. That's bad. It's all about the dose. It's all about the relationship. So that's a point in our cult evolution that we are in, and so there's confusion. Just tell me what to do. Well, if you're up at the top of the plateau and you're told to do what you've always done, you're just before the descent, because in a circle, what goes up goes down, what goes left goes right. In a circle, you have to know where you are on the process, on the wheel. Are you in an in-breath? Well, then pretty soon you're going to have to take an out-breath. You may still have a little bit more. Now, if you're right at this point, and somebody tells you to take a deep breath in, you can't do it. It doesn't work. And so we're moving from extremism and simple thinking to circular and ecological thinking. We're moving towards a focus on symmetry. So what do we do with this quest? Because that was our beginning. The quest, what does value look like? Now, of course, what we know is that what value looks like today will be toxic tomorrow if we follow it with too much fanaticism. The story of the person who's, going to absolutely make $5 million and makes $5 million. They have a shattered family, a shattered body, a cynical and depressed mind, but they stuck to it and they made $5 million, and they'd give it all up in a heartbeat to have a little bit of love, presence, innocence, and affection in their lives. But that doesn't make sense when it's an either-or paradigm. So that's always the danger. And yet, what we tend to idealize if it's authentic, meaning what is authenticity? We are each inside a number of processes, and we each have a number of different components, personas, etc. And within that, we're currently locating within our probability field, somewhere off-center. And the point of grace is going to be closer to the center, but not always directly, you see? Sometimes we need to finish the exhale before taking an inhale, because if we're exhaling here, and then we're going to inhale here, and exhale here, and then we're going to inhale here and exhale here. Well, you need to know at what point in the process you're on as you move from one extreme to the other. You need to be aware of where you are on the continuums of your life, the balance between boredom and chaos, the monotony of the unquestioned norm, the chaos and overwhelm of too many choices all at once. Where are you on the continuum of boredom and chaos? Where are you on the continuum of giving and receiving? Where are you on the continuum of speaking and listening? Where are you on the continuum of loving and being loved? Where are you on the continuum of heart, mind, and body? And have you reached the apex of your cycle in preparation for doing the opposite? Or do you still have a ways to go? Are you a 5-year-old who still needs to learn about the dogmas of your cult in preparation for unlearning it all and realizing it's all a piece of crap, a bit later, when you say this is all nonsense? But you cannot learn that it's all nonsense until you're taking it in. If the 5-year-old still needs to learn the dogmas of their cult in preparation for the adolescent, which will tear it all to shreds and say that it's all pointless. And in preparation for the adult that can weigh the best and the worst and take some of this and mix it with that and create and iterate a new life. Where are you on your cycles? And what does value? What does value look like to you? Because value will often be the opposite of your extreme, which is why you value it, right? If you've been meditating for 10 years and your physical reality has fallen to pieces, you're way over here, value may look like a functioning car. If you've got 27 Rolls Royces, you're probably going to be dreaming about never having to answer my cell phone again. Wouldn't that be nice? Oh, I was just sitting down to this 5-star meal again. They couldn't figure this out at the office, right? And you're going to want to go over here. So your value is going to be the other side of your extreme. But this is the quest that, while unique for everyone, is a valuable journey. It's not surprising. What is the most value? What does a valuable life look like? That's going to take you on a valuable journey. And so what does value look like? What does it look like for me? And how can I take steps towards that? How can I take steps towards that? To move towards symmetry, to move towards beauty, truth, and goodness. What does that look like to me? And you can describe it, and you can break down paths. Now, the authentic description and path is going to reference your own circle. For example, if you've been invisible your entire life in certain areas, then you may want to move over to here to being the center of attention. Somewhere on your journey to being the center of attention, you're going to go through a place of grace and symmetry. But you may still have a deficit, and so you may have to come through extreme self-centeredness back to now I do not need to be the center, and do not need to be isolated. Now I'm in this beautiful, graceful point of the center. And so most of consciousness building is the process of going through extremes. You want to have the most consciousness. Extremes trigger awareness of all kinds of things you didn't know you didn't know. It's one of the reasons why artists worry about too much comfort, right? Because some of our great artists create their best art in some extreme. And when you give them a servant and 500 channels and a comfortable resort and press of a button to order any meal flown in from around the world, now do your best art. Well, let's see, let's on channel number 76. Now let's switch to 54. I don't want to go over and do that painting. You know, let's do this. And so you have the crisis of success, where you get really good at something over here and you bring back, and then the necessity didn't push it. Can get a little bit too comfortable, and so you then have the discipline of creating synthetic discomfort. Spending a day, a month on the streets, learning what it's like to be homeless. All kinds of interesting innovations, and I had no idea that this was this, and wow, that's so interesting, and I appreciate, wow, this feels nice to be in a shower, and you have all this awareness and flood of information. In conclusion, a good journey, a solid journey for anyone at any time, is to locate your probability field, where you're at, and dream about value. What would a valuable person do here? If I valued myself as tremendously important, how would I treat myself? What would I do? What does value look like? And it may often look like, if we are sincere in the examination, as the opposite of what we were doing. John D. Rockefeller Sr. accumulated a great amount of money, but what brought the greatest joy in older years was not more and more, but giving it away. So if you don't complete a cycle, if you do not complete a breath, if you become constipated, the energy dies. So where are you on your breath? Where will value be the richest? On the infinite wave of evolution, in the infinite pattern of life. Hi, I'm Dane Rose. All knowledge begins with a paradigm, and out of that paradigm comes an idea, an awareness that we adopt, reject, or synthesize into something better. It doesn't become wisdom, it doesn't become useful until we take action, until we integrate it into not only our thoughts, but our feelings, our body, our words, and our way of being. For that to occur, we have to move from the passive media paradigm into more active engagement. In the link below, in the More Information section, is an invitation to join a very small, deliberately filtered, high-quality discussion with a group of people who share a common language and want to work with these ideas, with me and with one another, with the sole goal of creating 10 times more sustainable well-being for ourselves and those around us. per unit of energy invested. Thank you for watching.